The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Welcome to the Echo Chamber. I'm Arthi Shah. I'm your host for today's episode that features Method Communications co-founder and CEO David Parkinson and the CEO of Harvard Communications out of the UK, Louie St. Clair. So as many of you know, the Chime Group, which owns Harvard, bought Method last year. And for those of you who want a little bit more context around that, there's a link in the show notes to the story in which we broke that news last year. Well, now David and Louie are working closely together on a global tech offering that spans San Francisco, Salt Lake City, New York, London, and possibly beyond. So this is the conversation I had with them to learn more about the new entity and to talk more broadly about sort of the state of tech PR today. Welcome to the show, Louie and David.
Thank you.
So here we are at the Marriott in San Francisco in the what they call the Concierge Lounge, and right now we are the only people in here, I think, but hopefully it stays that way, or there might be some background noise. But I'm glad to have both of you here today. David came all the way from Salt Lake City, and Louie came all the way from London. And as most of you all probably know, I'm guessing most of our listeners know this news because it was actually one of our most read stories for last year. The Chime Group, which owns Harvard out of the UK, which is a technology shop out of the UK, which Louie is a part of, bought Method at the end of 2018. And now Louie from Harvard and David from Method are sort of joining forces to tackle kind of the global tech world. What did I miss? Do you?
No, I think that is accurate. You know, when we look at where we're at as an agency and what our clients are looking for, they're really looking for that global footprint. What can you do for us in the UK? What can you do for in Asia? Trusting the brand that we've built with them for, you know, all of these years. And so when we looked at on do we build it organically or do we look at a partner who truly believes in the same mission, culture, drive, and we found that with Chime and with Harvard, and we have already shared quite a few clients and are expecting, you know, several more over the next few months.
And from our side, the bringing Method on board was just a culmination of a lot of hard work. Really, we have lots of clients in the UK or who have come from Europe and the Far East who say, "Can you do what you do for us in the UK and the US?" And also clients who are US clients who said, "Look, have you got any recommendations for the US?" And it felt like for us, it was a really good time to formalise a proper partnership where we could kind of share best practice, as David said, but also kind of go at the market with a bit more gusto. And there's never been a better time to be in tech, really.
So a few questions. And usually with listeners, when we have three people on the call, I have to let them know who's who. But I think people can figure out that Louie is the one with the lovely accent. An interesting thing that was noticed about the sell is you all retained branding. So now we have three different brands at play, right? I mean, there's the Chime Group, there's Harvard, and there's Method. So I'm curious to know what the thinking was in terms of retaining all of these brands, and is it the long-term goal, or at some point will everybody be part of the Chime Group?
Well, I think the world is littered with acquisitions that have gone wrong, where I think big groups have bought up agencies, taken the brand too quickly, and which really rips the soul out of agencies. I mean, when you acquire a company, and a PR company or any kind of marketing services company, you're acquiring a culture, a bunch of really brilliant people that have put their heart and soul into a company. If you've built a company to the size of Methods, that's been a lot of hard work and blood, sweat and tears, and then a book of clients. But you have to keep that together, otherwise, without those three things, there is no agency. So it's more about making sure that you can work together really well, that you understand each other's cultures, that the processes that you have in place where you can get some economies of scale work really, really well, before you worry about brand. It's a bit like when you start a business. People say, we're going to start a new business. What should we call it? It's like, wrong question. The name comes after you've really worked out what it is you're selling and who you're selling it to and why you're doing it in the first place. So I'm sure we'll look at brand in time, but Harvard's a really strong brand in Europe. Method are a really, really strong brand in North America. And we can do a really, really good job with our clients. They'll all know that there's a team they know and love in the US and there's a team they know and love in Europe. It doesn't have to have the same name. Right. And if we need to, and there's clients that need to do that, we've always got Chime, which we always describe it, you get a boutique with Harvard and Method feels like a boutique, but we've also got a big brother that can sponsor the Olympics or the big brand piece from BCCB that we can call upon when we need to. We'd have to make it up as we go along. Those guys were there, so it should work pretty well.
I like your point about going about building a business is all wrong if you are so focused on what do we call it, and less about how are we going to make it work. And to your point about acquisitions gone wrong, I mean, as I've talked to David about before, all you have to do is spend a few hours on our archives, and it's a graveyard of these. So so we always eye these, especially when you have two really solid brands, right? Like Harvard and Method. There's always some amount of cynicism around. Oh gosh, like what will this do ultimately, or what? Because there are so many examples where this hasn't gone well. Both of you have touched on this already, but is there anything else that you're doing to try to avoid some of these pitfalls? And in particular, I'm curious about the employee buy-in, because I think that's key. If the teams don't buy in and you lose great people, then it kind of falls apart right there.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we've talked about this in great length on where you've seen what I considered really great agencies. And then a holding company or private equity company will come in, buy them, and then, that's really, the end of that agency. And so when we looked at what were next steps, we were extremely careful vetting Chime and vice versa on how will this affect our culture, how it will affect our brand, and all of the checklists that we had, they checked that box. And so when it was time to announce the acquisition, everyone at Method was excited about it. They had already worked with Harvard over the past year, and so we had team members there to talk about the great synergies. Our agency, looking at a global footprint is important to them. It gives them a chance to work in London and vice versa. And so everyone in our agency thought it was, a really smart move. They know we are really entrepreneur based, really look at calculated risks, but more importantly, how do you continue to differentiate yourself? And when Method was started in 2010, we came out with a completely differentiated model based on my work coming from the corporate side for several years. And so keeping ahead of, of the market, how do we, really build that key differentiator, and that's with the acquisition with Chime and with Harvard, where we can now compete on a global scale, and to be able to also meet the needs of our clients. A lot of them, about 40% of our clients are billion-dollar brands that are in huge growth mode. And so with that, we're able to service them and to be able to grow with them, which I think is really important, yet not losing who Method is.
And I think that's Brit. I mean, when you've got $40 billion brands over here, you know, the startup scene in London is fantastic, but these are not businesses as well funded. You know, 3 to 30 million investment is a lot over in the UK, but working with $41 billion value brands that haven't yet globalised is a huge opportunity, business opportunity for both those brands, for Method and for us. I think also on the acquisition piece, you can always tell when you're speaking to potential businesses around that it's when they say they're looking for an exit. And I think one of the key questions to ask, we've always asked, is what are your plans for the next 10 years? Because we want to work with companies that have got a plan where becoming part of the Chime kind of family or stable of brands is going to help kickstart your growth, help you to grow faster than you would be able to do if you weren't doing it yourself. Not let's just do this for 3 years and there's a pile of cash at the end of it. That's not what it's all about. And I think that's what takes the time to find those like-minded people. And I think we've obviously got that here.
So you had mentioned, it's a great time to be in tech, and that's true. I mean, if you look around at, the companies that have even filed for IPO this year, it's driving. It's a huge driver of the U.S. economy and in the global economy. But is that a challenge being a niche agency, because tech becomes so generalized and it touches all facets of life, of business, of the world? Do you find that being a niche agency now can be a detriment sometimes when some of these technology companies say, "Hey, look, I'm everything to everybody. I need a big generalist shop"?
I think it's totally the opposite. I think we were talking about this morning, and if you're a company that people don't know outside of the US, you've got a huge valuation, and you're moving to Europe. You need someone who can really get under the skin of the narrative. Whether you're operating across security and privacy, whether you're in AI, whether you're in fintech, the company you work with needs to be able to get to the bottom of what makes you different, because there's so much competition very, very quickly, and then activate that into campaigns and storytelling that can help you find your route that's going to help you stand out. And that's increasingly difficult. That's hard for generalists to do, I think. The other thing that's great about specialist tech is everything's tech now, right? So we work with Mediacom, who are the largest media buying agency in the world, but programmatic advertising is not killing their business, but is fundamentally changing their business. Mm-hmm. So we start to work. We're working with a lot of brands that don't necessarily make the tech, but tech's impacting. Right. The third part is the tech narrative's changing, right? We've been in the city for a couple of days, and you kind of are starting to see this change around the way the public are viewing tech brands. From a reputational perspective, that becomes again a huge opportunity from a corporate comms perspective, because these companies are going to need real help in the areas of public policy, regulation, and obviously their reputational management, because the general global tech narrative is quite tricky at the moment.
Do you find one thing that's interesting about that is, because this has been a conversation that's come up a few times with folks, is there is a backlash against technology companies. There is kind of a sense of outrage even about the way that people's data has been handled, but consumer behavior isn't changing dramatically. I actually went through and did notice how many deactivated Facebook accounts I saw on my friend list, which was certainly higher than usual, but most of those folks are still on Instagram. They oftentimes have WhatsApp accounts. So I don't think. So how do you counsel clients around reputation when behavior isn't changing? I mean, the level of outrage is, that seems to be increasing, but that's not resulting in a mass exodus from these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting phenomenon, right? So if you look back at the financial crisis in 2007. the banking crisis, and they were the real villains at the time. But you still need to you still need to use a bank, but you don't have to use a lot of these tech services. And it so far hasn't had a huge effect on the user base. It just remains to be seen it remains to be seen how that's going to change over time. I think you've got a lot of corporations moving into the space where they feel maybe government or public policy is failing, and there's a huge challenge there around are people comfortable with that? I think at Davos one of the big themes was business filling in and being a force for good, and when that becomes good for business in areas like sustainability, that's when companies will really act. I think we're starting to see that. And in the tech space, I think that it's about trust and how all the big tech brands continue to build trust, more openness, certainly more regulation is coming, more transparency around data, more transparency around security of data, and I think we'll start to see all of. If you talk about the Valley, you'll see all of those companies starting to really, really kind of work out what their story is, and in those areas coming forward. Yeah,
you touched on something about confidence. I mean, confidence in government is at an all-time low, and the private sector is sort of stepping in, and there is higher confidence in companies. We've seen the tech sector in particular take the lead on some of this and around purpose. Whether it's LGBT rights, whether it's climate change, whether it's homelessness in San Francisco, we've seen that. So that must be interesting another interesting reason it's nice to be a tech agency right now, right? I mean, this intersection of purpose and brand and innovation. It seems like everything it's like the perfect storm within the tech sector.
Yeah, and that's it's really cool to work with our clients on some of those initiatives. So, for example, Qualtrics, the co-founder was diagnosed with cancer early on, and his son Ryan came back and to help him with his treatments, and that's where they came up with the idea of Qualtrics, and they always said once we were able to grow a thriving business, that we would be heavily concentrated on curing cancer. And so they launched the 5 for the Fight cancer program. That method has been able to work with. And so with that, we're able to, really help these companies shape what that giving back is. And Vivint is another example of really big in autism. One of the co-founders of Vivint, he had 2 children who are autistic. The rates of autism in Utah are higher than average, but that is their whole campaign around giving back and in turn, really helping them build their brand. And like you said, that today people are not necessarily relying on the government for much of anything, and instead are looking at what their employer is doing and what they stand for and what they're giving back. And that's, what's driving people to stay at a company more than anything, I would say.
You nailed it. I think the latest Edelman Trust Barometer actually showed that people trust their employers above all. Like even more than media. It's really interesting.
And when you talk about things like psychological safety and mental well-being, the tech companies have been way ahead of that for a long time.
Yes.
And in terms of trusting the employees, where you're going to get that help from, it's most likely to be the person you go to work for every day at the moment.
So kind of bringing it back to your capabilities as a combined entity, traditionally we've always seen this sort of inverse relationship between how innovative an agency's portfolio is and how innovative their capabilities are, right? Because when you have this amazing portfolio of great brands, it's media relations, and you can sustain on that. You don't need to invest in some of these other things when you're working with some of these marquee tech brands. So that's always been somewhat disappointing about tech agencies sometimes is when the rest of the industry has been moving forward and adding new capabilities. It sometimes felt a little stuck in the traditional. So how do you kind of view your capabilities, especially as a combined entity?
I think we've made that a real virtue of our business, and I completely agree with you because it has always been quite media relations driven. I think if you operate in a specialist sector, you need to have a depth of knowledge of that sector better than anyone else. That's you've got to know that inside out, and then you've also got to have a breadth of service that allows you to solve the complex problems and challenges that might be brought to you. So if all I do is media relations and you've got a problem, I will say the answer to your problem is media relations, and that does not work anymore. So certainly at Harvard we've spent the last 2.5 years now building out full service capabilities. So we have creative, we have planning, the kind of planning department you see in advertising agency, creative and digital and social, and then demand generation, and then obviously the PR and the AR capabilities. About 2/3 of our business now is what you would describe as traditional PR, and the rest is a marketing agency. All kinds of challenges with that, but what it does is it means that we can provide the right solutions to clients based on what they need rather than the other way around. And I know that a method you've kind of built something very similar, which is brilliant.
And we've kind of talked about this too, Arthi, is that, today's PR person, it's just not earned media. That they need to have social capabilities, digital capabilities, content capabilities, and that's something we've really put an emphasis on at Method, is really building what a PR person's responsibilities are today. But at the same time, really building out our marketing capabilities. We hired a new SVP of marketing this year. We've added creative, we've added social strategy, we've added business insights. And so we're definitely looking at how we can, again, meet what our clients are asking for. And especially in tech PR, there's this, and I wouldn't say it's a new role, but one that's, been becoming more and more heard of as, this VP of corporate marketing and brand management. And within that, they have the capabilities of the social, of the digital, the blogs, some corporate marketing functions, and they're looking for one solution. And so with that, we're able to provide that, but knowing still that earned media is extremely important, and we have doubled down on earned media, making sure that we have, getting to know all of the gatekeepers at key conferences, and the awards, and really building out, making sure that we have the top journalists come in and meet with our staff and so forth, and so making sure we're not abandoning that, but really growing to what the markets are looking for.
I think that balance is so key, because I think research does show that what ultimately drives purchase decision is earned ultimately. Yes. Even awareness and some of the other marketing initiatives kind of drive some of that stuff. But when you're actually coming down to, especially for a huge B2B purchase, right? When it's really going to be about trust, and that's earned, in the earned media.
Totally agree.
And we have this beautiful view right now of San Francisco, and because of that, there may be some background noise of birds. I don't know what kind of birds those were.
They were like seagulls.
They were seagulls, and they were singing. And every time David actually started to speak, so we'll try our best to edit that out. But just listeners, that's what you heard. Well, this was a great conversation, and I think the industry. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this was one of our most viewed stories of 2018. It trended pretty heavily, so the industry is curious and watching. So,
why do you think that?
I think there's a lot of tech agencies that are looking for an exit, to be honest. And so when they're is one, when there's a deal that's made, I think there's a lot of curiosity around, well, what happened, why them, why now? There's a lot of shops out here that I think are kind of trying to figure out what their next step is as well. So, yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm sure we'll have you all back on soon at some point.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes another episode of the Echo Chamber. Thank you to our guests, David and Louie. Thank you to our production team at Marketeers. And we will be back soon with another episode.
You've been listening to the Echo Chamber. Brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.